I'm in agreement with you guys. It is a clear and present danger to the freedom of speech. I think the Kamala Harris administration is on many fronts. It's not just about the First Amendment. Obviously, would go after semi-automatic rifles. So the Second Amendment, she would go after. I assume that there would be no change about policies that are covered under the Fourth Amendment, your right to privacy and such. So I think that
freedom of religion, which is the other the vital part of the First Amendment that we don't talk enough about.
I mean, I mean, you guys know Jordan Peterson better than anyone here. His perspective is if you don't have the freedom to talk and say what you want, then you don't actually have the freedom to think. And I agree with that strongly. And I think that without the protections that are provided in the Constitution being something that the American people truly believe in, and I think the American people, or at least a significant portion of the American people, have at least considered these ideas passé and not important if they don't affect them directly, which most people kind of go along to get along, so they don't actually affect them directly. I think too many people will allow for it, and I think that COVID was really a demonstration of that.
There's another thing that the Democrats are planning to do, and they're openly planning it, right? I mean, so Kamala Harris has talked about killing the filibuster for a wide variety of things. Yeah. One of the things that they would do if they got control of the Senate and the presidency, God forbid, is they would immediately move to make changes to the Supreme Court. Right? They've talked openly about this. They would talk about packing the Supreme Court, adding justices. They would talk about putting term limits in to get rid of some of the older justices who tend to be the more Republican justices at this point in time. And if that happened, then the real bulwark in favor of the First Amendment is gone. Because the Democrats have made perfectly clear that they do not actually believe that things like hate speech, what they call hate speech, or misinformation, that these things are covered by the First Amendment, right? Tim Walz has openly said that. Yep. He says misinformation and hate speech are not covered by the First Amendment. If they ever got a Supreme Court that was friendly to that position, then you can kiss dissent in the country goodbye.
I come from the music industry. That's part of the reason why I'm here. I'm in a heavy metal band, and a lot of my people that I've been friendly with, or people that I've known for years and years that were staunchly against the Bush administration, and that you would think would consider themselves liberals and be saying things like, "Oh, the First Amendment and our right to create art and et cetera." These things should be fundamental to them, should be foundational. And as soon as things like you mentioned, they talk about hate speech or whatever, they're like, or they like to say things like social media is a whole new world and it's different and we have a responsibility. And I'm personally appalled by these arguments, because I am as close to a free speech absolutist as I think you can be. And now I understand that there's always going to be guardrails when you're dealing with dealing in public and stuff. But when it comes to exchange of ideas, right? There shouldn't be any kind of limits on the ideas that you're exchanging, just so long as you're being respectful of other people and you're not looking to be inflammatory. And the people in the music industry that I know, they frequently just drop the ball on it and stop caring about that kind of stuff.
I want to go back to something you said a second ago, Mary, because it probably doesn't actually matter to anyone else here, but it's a picadillo of mine. Anonymous trolls on X love to say, the Daily Israel Wire wants Kamala to win because they'll make more money, because all the money is in opposition media.
Hey, and I wasn't that cynical.
I know. But I do want to just point out to everyone listening at home that I'm going to make a fucking lot of money no matter who wins the presidency, because
go off.
Because I happen to the world doesn't happen to me. The Daily Wire happens to the world doesn't happen to the Daily Wire. But I also want to say that I want Donald Trump to be the president. It will be bad for my business if Kamala Harris becomes the president. It will be bad for my family if Kamala Harris becomes the president. It will be bad for my nation if Kamala Harris becomes the president. And I want to just say again, it will be bad for my business. The social media platforms will crack down on us and cut into our revenue in enormous ways if Kamala Harris wins the presidency. They will criminalize vast amounts of the thing. Not criminalize in the sense that they put you in jail, I hope, but they will criminalize in the sense that they penalize you for having these opinions in public spaces. They'll make it very difficult for us to function economically. They will do everything they can to shut us out of the public square. I won't let that defeat my business, but it will be very bad for my business. And then also, I know it may come as a shock to people, but I would rather live in a free society than be rich. I'd rather live in a free society than have nice studios. I'd rather live in a free society where my daughter has a chance at knowing any of the freedoms and peace and prosperity that I've largely enjoyed in my life than live in some sort of totalitarian attempt at leftist utopia, which has never worked anywhere that's been tried anywhere on earth. So you weren't being quite as cynical, perhaps, as the anonymous trolls on X, but it is an important point because it is like a major line of attack against people who are in our business.
Also, I just want to point out, as a Jew who loves money, money's great, and I am Jewish, as you may have noticed from the funny hat. I have expended exorbitant amounts of capital in favor of both President Trump and the Senate candidates who are running this campaign, like on a personal level. I've dropped a check to President Trump. Okay, I've dropped checks throughout this campaign cycle. I've put my own life on hold to go campaign for Senate candidates and get out the vote for the Senate candidates.
Did an entire hour and change with Senate candidates recently. I saw that.
I mean, so here are the I've campaigned with the following candidates: Tim Sheehy in Montana, Dave McCormick in Pennsylvania, Bernie Moreno in Ohio, Ted Cruz last night in Texas, Eric Hovde in Wisconsin. I went to New York on October 7th with President Trump, and I brought him a hostage family to meet. Wow. I did
and
a
to the
fundraiser.
Rebbe's grave.
That's it, right. The Rebbe Menachem Mendel Schneerson's grave. That was the campaign's choice, by the way. That was not I did not book that. I brought the hostage family. That was his choice to be at the Rebbe's grave on October 7th. I'm not Chabadnik, actually.
They were not Ben's hostages. It's not
right. Exactly. Yeah. No, I don't take hostages. But I personally co-sponsored a fundraiser for President Trump at Trump Doral. Okay, so for somebody who supposedly is invested in Kamala Harris winning so I can make more money, I'm expending a shitload of money to make sure that she doesn't win. I just like to point that out on a personal level.
Well, let's talk about foreign policy for a second. What is the prediction of a Kamala presidency versus a Trump presidency, especially pertaining to? I know, Elaad, you want to talk about Taiwan, but Ukraine and Israel are the big conflicts right now we're all concerned about.
So President Trump brought the best foreign policy of my lifetime. Okay, and he didn't bring that foreign policy because he's like a full-scale America first, Father Coughlin isolationist. He said this on my program. Okay, I deliberately asked him this question. He understands foreign policy. Foreign policy is a thing that actually is quite simple. It goes like this. If you cross this line, I'm going to beat the shit out of you. Okay, that's actually how foreign policy works. If you're the United States of America, the most powerful force, doesn't mean you use the force, right? It's the credible threat of use of force that deters other people from doing bad things. And President Trump totally understands that. He threatened force more than any president of my lifetime and used it less than any president of my lifetime because he was very credible in that threat of use of force, right? Some days it was like he was writing a letter to Kim Jong-un. I love Kim Jong, he's my friend. And then on the other, he's like, and I have a button, it's bigger than yours. And if you did, like, that was Donald Trump and how he did foreign policy. And it was really, really good. It's why he was able to broker peace in the Middle East for the first time in 40 years. It was by ignoring the intransigent and intractable problem between the Palestinians, who are exterminationist and eliminationist with regard to the state of Israel, and instead going over to UAE and Bahrain and yes, Saudi, which, by the way, if he'd been reelected, by February 2021, Saudi's in the Abraham Accords. It is that clear. It is 100% true. I know people on both sides of that conversation. That would have been a thing that happened because he understands that people in that area have a common interest against Iran, which Joe Biden then proceeded to completely blow up by giving them billions of dollars in aid, like opening up their economy, allowing them to fund terrorism all over the region, and opening a wide gap visibly with not only Israel, by the way, but with Saudi Arabia. You remember that Joe Biden came into office yelling about Saudi Arabia and Mohammed bin Salman and about how they had killed Jamal Khashoggi and all this kind of stuff. And he started distancing from Saudi. Iran saw that. They saw an opening. They exploited it with October 7th. That's why they were telling Hamas to actually do October 7th. None of this shit happens under Donald Trump. The pullout from Afghanistan does not go down that way because Donald Trump doesn't like? He doesn't like losing. Okay, that's one thing about President Trump that is very obviously clear. So even if he had decided to pull out from Afghanistan, he certainly would not have done so at the cost of billions of dollars of American military equipment, much of which is now in the hands of China. And certainly not at the cost of the visual of people falling from wheel wells at Bagram Air Base as American soldiers get blown up. And as far as Russia invading Ukraine, he told me this. Guys, was at the fundraiser at Trump Trials. It's my favorite Trump story that he's told me. So President Trump is talking to me and he's like, Ben, you want to know why Russia never invaded Ukraine while I was president? He did under Biden. He did under Obama. You want to know? So I called up Vlad. I said, Vlad, don't go, whatever you do, don't go into Ukraine. And he said, why, Mr. President? I said, because if you do, Vlad, I'm going to bomb the shit out of you. And Vlad said, no, you won't, Mr. President. And I said, well, I might. And then he said, if there's a 5% chance that the most powerful military force on planet Earth is going to bomb the shit out of you, you know what you don't do, go into Ukraine.
He's got that famous story. It was a phone call. I can't remember who it was with.
Taliban, head of the Taliban.
Great.
Abdul.
I slid the photo to him.
I'm sending you a picture of your house right
He said, why is a picture of my house? You'll have to figure that one out.
Yeah. The version he told us was, because I'm going to bomb the shit out of your house, Abdul. Again, that is not the words of an isolationist. That's the words of a person who's realistic about the use of American power and the reality. Here's the problem with the sort of isolationist perspective in its classical definition. The problem with the isolationist perspective in its classical definition, because I think that actually most of the arguments that happen are among realists. Okay, neocons are people who believe that you can build like a functioning democracy in Afghanistan and Iraq. Okay, that's what neocons. I mean, if you want to go back to what the movement was saying in 2000, Paul Wolfowitz and company, that's what they were saying in actual 2003, 2004. You are not a neocon if you believe that the United States ought to fund Ukraine sufficient so that Russia doesn't walk into Kyiv. That is not definitionally a neocon. Okay, just to be clear about that, they're different. There are a bunch of realists, and then there's a question between realists about particular military interventionists. A full-scale isolationist will say, if America withdraws from the world will be a nicer place because America will be less involved in places around the world. And that's not true, because then a vacuum occurs, and it turns out everybody on Earth has agency, not just the United States. It turns out China has its own interests, and Russia has its own interests. And those interests don't align with the United States very often. That doesn't mean that every time Russia does something, it involves our core interests and we need to act, or that every time China does something, it involves our core interests. Right, that's where the realism comes in. Is this enough of a threat to our core interests that we ought to either use force or threaten tariffs or threaten some other form of interventionism? But, I think that the sort of conflation of all these foreign policy ideas into Donald Trump is an isolationist, which is why he was against the neocons. Like that is a false divide, I think, in the way that we discuss foreign policy in the country, and it's not realistic about actually how foreign policy is conducted.
Unfortunately, I'm a little bit less hopeful than you are. I think if either Kamala Harris or Donald Trump are elected, we are seeing American hegemony around the world waning, and we're seeing conflicts flare up as a result of that. So Ukraine now is dealing with North Korean troops that North Korea is sending over. Israel is already in a multi-front war against Iran and many of its proxies. I feel like looking back in this in 10 years, we're going to say, oh, of course this was the start of another world war that we're dealing with. Also, the people who Trump are surrounding himself with makes me feel a little uncertain with how we would move forward. So, for example, J.D. Vance is probably embodied isolationism in the Republican Party more than anybody else, and that's the person he made his VP pick.
So I'm going to respond to a couple of those things. One, I don't think it's true that if Donald Trump becomes president that we are on a sure road to World War III, because deterrence is incredibly powerful. And just to explain the situation on the ground, I think the most likely scenario in Ukraine, if Donald Trump becomes president, is that Trump says to Putin, I'm going to continue, I can do this all day long. You want to do this? I will do. The Europeans will take the lead. I'll make them pay more, because this is what Trump likes to do. And I will fund this all day long until such time as we draw the line. And we know where the line is. The line is Donbass and the line is Crimea. And we'll solidify that, and there'll be some mutual defense commitments. This is Elon's proposal, by the way.
Republicans in the Senate support that? Because that's where I guess I have... Because
if Trump wants it, 100% they'll support it, because he's Donald Trump. As far as the... And by the way, again, I think that what he'll say is, I'm paying less than the Democrats would have, because I'm going to make the Europeans pay more. And he will. He will get them to pay more. And you know how I know this? Because he did this with NATO. This is precisely what he did with NATO. Okay, then, when it comes to Israel and its enemies in that area, what Donald Trump understands is that Israel does, in fact, have the strongest military in that region. And so what he will say to Israel and to its enemies is, listen, we don't want any part of any war over there, so go finish up your business and do it fast. This is exactly what he's saying right now. He's saying to the Israel, I happen to know this. He's saying to the, he's saying publicly as well as privately. He's saying to the Israeli government, if I get elected by January when I take office, I don't want this on my plate. So what I would like you to do is go fast and go hard and finish up whatever it is that you think that you have to do. And by the way, what Israel just demonstrated by blowing up the S-300s, which were the anti-missile and anti-aircraft weaponry shipped by the Russians to Iran in order to shoot down Israeli materiel, Israel blew up all that shit. So what they actually showed is that if they want to hit the nuclear facilities, they can absolutely hit the nuclear facilities, which is probably what's going to happen, I would guess, over the next couple of months.